Hi, this is Tanya Becker, and I'm your host for today's episode of PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating. If you haven't already, please subscribe to PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating wherever you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Gareth Griggs with Flush M is here with me today, and we're going to talk about engine flushing. Specifically, we're going to chat about why motor flushing is so important, and we'll discuss the Flush M, a really clever device Gareth invented for Mercury Outboards to make motor flushing a lot easier. Thanks so much for being here today, Gareth.
Thank you for having me, Sonia. Appreciate it, and I'm happy to be a part of the team here at PartsVu.
Yeah, no, we're super excited to have you, and I'm looking forward to telling our audience all about the Flush M. But I wanted to start with a really basic discussion about motor flushing. You know, why it's so important to flush your outboard engine, and how often do you have to do it?
Good question to open with, Tanya. The main reason we want to flush our outboards is predominantly they're a big investment, both the boat and the engine itself. So we want to protect that investment as we would do with any other investment. So we can break the flushing up into two very important reasons, and one being corrosion and the other being fouling. So without getting into a chemistry lecture, seawater in particular has a very pronounced chemical composition, if you will, over freshwater. So that chemical makeup of the salt water makes it a very conductive and corrosive liquid, if you will. So when we flush the engine after a saltwater use, we want to get rid of any residual salt water from the engine block to prevent any corrosion. So the second part being the fouling. Fouling we can break up into two sections too. You can have fouling of foreign matter as well as fouling of scale buildup, if you will. So if you're using your boat in any body of water for that matter, you're going to at some point start picking up foreign matter. So whether that's seaweed, sand, algae, lilies, mud, if you will, it's going to make its way into the cooling passages of your engine. And at some point, you're going to continue to use your boat, and it's going to compound the blockages of those smaller passages. So yes, some of those passages may be big, some of them are going to be a quarter inch. And eventually what's going to happen is those will block up, and the transfer of heat from the engine through to the water is going to slowly fade. And you're going to encounter engines overheating and mechanical problems down the road. So you want to flush for that reason. And the other reason being the lime and scale buildup, is much the same as your domestic kettle. So at some point you'll find that scale building up in the kettle, and you might boil it a few times with something like vinegar. In the boat world, there's many products on the market that you can purchase, and say, for example, some customers might every 5 uses, maybe once a month, add this chemical to their freshwater flush adapter and pass it through the engine, and that'll dissolve the scale. The scale again being building up, creating a thicker layer, inhibiting the heat transfer from the engine to the water. So those are the most important reasons, really.
Right.
As far as going, sorry.
No, products like Salt Off, right? Or what you're referring to in terms
There
of.
we go, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, got it. Yeah.
So, and as far as frequency of flushing, we always recommend, you've got to follow the manufacturer's instructions. Typically, that's always going to say after every use. But as you and I both know as boaters, you might find yourself weekending in the Bahamas or what have you, and you're not going to use your onboard freshwater supply to flush your engines. Just when you get back after the trip, just stick back to your maintenance and every so often after use.
Yeah, that makes tons of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty clear. I mean, I think it's pretty clear why flushing after saltwater outings or saltwater adventures is so critical. But flushing for saltwater or for freshwater boaters rather is really important as well, right? For the fouling and the dirt and grime and so forth. Is that true?
Absolutely. So your freshwater users are still subject to the same foreign matter. So you're going to have your sand again, you're going to have your mud, your algae blooms, lily pads. I don't know if you're fishing or just boating. There's always silt and debris in the water. And as we just previously discussed, these same foreign bodies are going to foul up your cooling passages in your engine, and you're going to end up with overheating and end up with your boat at the dealer getting maintenance done.
That makes
So you
sense.
definitely want to be flushing after freshwater use too.
Gotcha. We recommend, the PartsVu team recommends engine flushing after, every use, as you pointed out, within reason, not every day after your Bahamas cruise, but after every reasonable outing. But we also recommend motor flushing after periods where your engine, your boat has been idle. Season breakout, for instance, is a common case. Do you agree with this?
Again, absolutely, Tanya. So a lot of our neighbors, family, and friends live up north in climates that do have freezing temperatures. And what they often do is, speaking with outboards and inboards for that matter, is they put antifreeze in their cooling passages, and they do an array of other winterizing procedures. But because we're talking about flushing, we'll stick and gear our conversation towards that. Um, I'd take it a bit further than just a flush. I would say after winterizing, it would be great to run your engine at home. So you would drain your antifreeze if you've used that, and that would prevent it from contaminating your local waterways when you get there. And then run the engine to make sure that your water impeller is producing water pressure, your telltale is clear, your thermostats are opened, your cylinders are all firing, you don't need a spark plug change. And what that's going to do is let you know that your engine is running optimally at home, and not find out of any problems when you're at the boat ramp and potentially ruin a whole day for yourself and all your guests or family.
That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah,
Discovering problems before you get out there is usually always a good thing.
exactly.
So let's talk about Flush M. What is it and why did you invent it?
All right, so Flush M is a product that we've developed. I worked for a very long time on a Boston Whaler 420 Outrage. That particular boat was equipped with 4 Mercury Verado 350 horsepower, the L6 versions. And I, at the end of the day, found myself pretty frustrated with the amount of time and effort it took to flush these motors properly whilst I was stowing it for the day. So I found myself doing a little bit of research online, a couple of, big forums, social media, and I soon discovered that it was quite a pronounced problem and a widespread problem. So fast forward today, a little bit of R&D, prototyping, and a patent. We came out with Flush'em, and essentially it is a very quick and easy, simplified way of flushing Mercury engines specifically.
Great. And so you found that flushing with the built-in hose port that the Mercs, late model Mercs at least have generally, it was just slow and just more time consuming and not quite as effective as you liked.
Yeah, it was a bit time consuming and a bit, for lack of a better term, finicky, if you will, or fiddly. There were a couple of processes that could be deemed unnecessary if you engineered it differently, which is exactly what we did. And we found that on the newer engines, let's say from 2018, 2020 onwards, the OEM flush plug became increasingly difficult to remove from the engine cowling. And if you've ever used or own one of these engines, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And that really compounded the problem for us. So we found that the Flush'em really solved that and made the whole process even more deserving to proceed with.
That makes a lot of sense. And from what I understand, Flush'em provides some benefits other than just easier motor flushing, right?
Yeah, we tried to engineer some additional characteristics into it in order to make it, more user friendly, have more features, more of a pro than just a flushing adapter. So the cap not only is aesthetic to cover the internationally recognized Gardenia male fitting, but it has a few unique features. If you looked inside of the cap, there's a small plug, and that plug seals the orifice in the male connection. And the benefit of that plug is that all Mercury engines have an inline check valve in the cooling system. And those tend to fail due to, again, fouling. Something will block it, so water will pass through. Cyclic stresses, there's a little steel spring in there that sometimes breaks. And ultimately, what happens is water passes that check valve and sprays out the two orifices in the OEM plug, which you would see if you look very closely. So our cap on our Flush'em seals that orifice. So if your check valve fails, you won't have that distracting water spray. And that facilitates a seal up to about 20 psi. So if you're in the upper range of your engine operating, you will see a little bit of water egress, but there's no harm to your engine whatsoever.
Good, good.
Another small feature
Yeah.
that maybe you didn't touch on is for our friends and family again up north in the freezing climates. In the center of the cap, you'll notice there's a tiny sacrificial seal, and for some users that want to replicate the OEM orifices in that cap, you can tap out that sacrificial seal. It's an irreversible procedure in preparing your boat, but it'll allow the egress of water if you wish to have that occur.
Oh, that makes a ton of sense. Great.
Yeah.
Good. So faster flushing, a couple of optimizations in terms of overall operation. So it's good. I mean, this is an
Yeah,
exciting
we're
product, I
trying
think.
to accommodate both the tropics climates, which is, let's be honest, 99% of our users, but also, the people that live in the freezing climates. We want to, cover all our bases.
I appreciate that. As our listeners know, I live in Chicago, so I'm right on Lake Michigan. So I appreciate
Okay.
when people don't forget about us. So with Flush M installed, can you run your engine while flushing like you would with a muff motor flusher style system, or no?
I'm glad you asked that, Tonya. So we encourage our customers to treat the Flush M as if it was the OEM setup. So the manual typically says not to run it with the engine on. Nowadays, we have such big engines, V6s, V8s, and the V10s and V12s now, that oftentimes the water pressure isn't enough. But to cut the story short and plain and simple for our listeners, just stick to what the manufacturer's manual says, and we say don't run it on the flush plug.
Right. Yeah. Because you generally you don't run the engine when you're using the manufacturer hose port, excuse me. So it's I'd imagine kind of a similar
Yeah,
thinking would apply here.
that's correct. And most of our users here in the United States have boats that stay in the water and or on a boat lift. And
Mhm.
really accessing the lower unit to put muffs on and run the engine is not really an option. So look, these major productions such as Mercury, Yamaha, Suzuki, they've been around for 80 plus years. And the manual says, just flush with the hose connection. It takes care of all the business that needs to happen inside. And they've figured it all out. So it's not a question we need to be asking anymore amongst the recreational users. We just do as the manual says. It looks after the engine from the internal passages, and that's all we need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the magic question. How difficult is the Flush M to install? Is it going to take people hours or just a few minutes?
Well, with a magic question, you get a magic answer. So the real beauty of the Flush M is that the installation pretty much mirrors the exact same technique and method you would use to flush the Mercury engine ordinarily. So if you were going to flush your Mercury, you would have to unscrew it from the cowling, then you'd unscrew the cap from the 3/4 inch hose connector, then you would screw your hose in and then reverse that. So with the flush M, you're going to unscrew it as if you were going to flush it with the hose, screw the flush M on instead of the hose, put it back into the cowling, and you never have to touch it again. All you have to do is
So,
pop the cap off and pop your quick connect on, turn the water pressure on, and you're flushing. It's real quick, real simple. It's brilliant, really.
right. It sounds quite easy. So, you know, as I'm listening to this, if I can handle this, then I think, pretty much everybody can. So it sounds easy enough.
Again, and echoing what I said earlier, especially with the later model engines, oftentimes I've seen people using hand tools such as pliers to try and get the plug out. It really, steps that aside and makes the whole process a lot easier. I've actually had one customer, in fact, say, "Your flushing has saved my marriage." Yeah.
I've heard this comment related to a few different categories of products in boating, like docking, like anchoring and docking solutions that make those processes easier. That often require two people.
Right, and I think
Often a
that's
husband and
key.
wife. Yeah.
That's key. On a boat, you want to maximize your time on the water, enjoying it. You don't want to spend time doing things that are difficult, especially if you're not an avid boater, and you don't want to do things that are tedious. You want everything to be streamlined. And I think no matter what industry you talk about, that's the way we are all geared to engineer products.
That's right. That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
So before I let you go, Gareth, this has been such a great conversation, and it's been really just kind of it's been really exciting just watching Flush M take off in the market. But I wanted to ask you a non-Flush M question. Where are some of your favorite places to boat or fish, and just what areas are your true loves?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, being an immigrant, I've done and seen some amazing parts of the world. Mozambique was a couple hours away from me. The Maldives I used to work in. But as an American and a mostly American audience, I live in Boca Raton, which is in Florida. But my favorite boating area would have to be the Bahamas. I think that's a key driver that it's such a popular boating destination. A couple of miles, couple of hours offshore, and you're in the Bahamas. And locally, I would say Jupiter and north up towards Stewart. Such beautiful inlets, such beautiful intercoastal waterways and beaches. My favorite parts of the country for boating.
Wonderful. Yeah, this sounds like a whole other conversation that would be fun to have. So you're an American citizen. You live here in Boca Raton, as you mentioned, but you're originally South African, right? So, and I know you've captained boats or worked on boats, as you mentioned, that all over the world, really. So that would be a fun conversation to learn more about all that sometime. So.
Absolutely, I'd love to come back, and that's exactly it. Spent my whole life at sea, really.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for being here, Gareth. This was, like I said, a really great conversation, and PartsVu is really proud to carry Flush M and to be on this journey with you. We've gotten a lot of great response to the product from our customer base, and we're looking forward to continue to work with you. So it's, I just encourage all of our listeners, if you own a late model, 75 horsepower to 450 horsepower Mercury Outboard, check out the Flush M on PartsVu.com. I've included a link to the product page in the show notes, and I'd also encourage our listeners to check out Flush M's website and follow them on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. All the links to Flush M's pages within those channels are also included in the show notes. And thanks again for being here, Gareth.
You're very welcome, and thank you. Don't forget, that's also compatible with the newly launched V10 Mercury Verado.
Oh, thanks for mentioning that. Yes. They've been launching engines, well, not every day, but they've been launching engines pretty regularly, so it's easy to forget about the newer one.
Exactly that. Yeah, they manufacture 4 series: the C Pro, the Pro XS, the Verado, and the 4-stroke. So. Again, 75 to 450 horsepower compatible.
Got it. Thanks so much, Gareth.
All right, Tanya, take care.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating podcast. Are you in a dock war with your boating neighbor for the cleanest boat? Check out our marine soaps, polishes, waxes, and more at PartsVu.com. And for free shipping, use the coupon code PVTalksShine. A special perk for our podcast listeners. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for boating knowledge, to keep in touch with the PartsVu community, and for special sales and promotions. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and check out the show notes for the coupon code just mentioned, more information about PartsVu and the products we offer, as well as our boating blog, the PartsVu Xchange. And a big thanks to Mind for performing the original music featured within this podcast.